I used to think my sister Carol was right, that my son's all-consuming obsession with drones was a problem. Now I know it was the only thing that mattered. Was I a good parent or just a lucky one? My name is Sarah, and for the past 8 years, my world has revolved around my son, Leo. While other kids his age were obsessed with video games or sports, Leo was obsessed with the sky, more specifically, with populating it. It started with a cheap, palm-sized quadcopter for his 10th birthday and spiraled from there. Soon our garage stopped looking like a place to park a car and more like an aerospace workshop. Wires, soldering irons, and tiny motors littered every surface. While other kids were kicking soccer balls, Leo was writing code to optimize flight patterns, 3D printing custom landing gear, and devouring textbooks on radio frequencies and aerodynamics. His bedroom ceiling was a graveyard of prototypes, each one a lesson learned. This wasn't a hobby. It was a language he was fluent in, a world he lived in more than our own. "You're enabling him, Sarah," Carol would say over the phone, her voice dripping with that signature blend of concern and judgment. "He needs to be outside, making friends. All that screen time, staring at those little monitors. It's not healthy. He's not developing normal social skills." Every family gathering became an intervention. My brother-in-law would chime in about team sports, my mother about fresh air. They saw a lonely boy lost in a bizarre fixation. I saw a genius at work, but their words were like water torture, a constant drip of doubt that eroded my confidence. The news was always on in the background back then, a low hum of distant problems, grid failures in the next state over, strange atmospheric readings from government satellites, things that felt a million miles away. They were just noise, static behind the real, immediate pressure of raising my son right. The criticism reached its peak last Tuesday. It was my mother's 75th birthday, and Carol called, ostensibly to coordinate a gift, but really to deliver another lecture. My mother lives 2 towns over, in a small house at the edge of a state park. She's stubborn and independent, but her health has been fragile since the emphysema diagnosis. She relies on an electric oxygen concentrator, with a few emergency tanks for backup. "You should have driven over there, Sarah," Carol said, her voice tight. "A phone call isn't enough, but I guess you're too busy supervising, whatever it is Leo does in that garage." The implication was clear. I was so lost in my son's weird world that I was neglecting my own mother. The words stung, lodging under my skin like splinters. I hung up, the familiar cocktail of guilt and anger churning in my stomach. Was she right? I looked out the window at the garage, where the lights were on, and felt a wave of exhaustion. That night it happened. The lights didn't just flicker, they died. One moment, the house was humming with the familiar sounds of the refrigerator and the television murmuring in the living room. The next, a profound and absolute silence fell, broken only by Leo's startled curse from the garage. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. The landline was a dead, hollow tone. A sudden, cold dread washed over me. The grid failures. The atmospheric anomalies. They weren't distant problems anymore. They were here. My first thought was of my mother, 2 towns over. No power, no phone. How long could her backup oxygen tanks last? A day? 2? The roads would be chaos. I stood in the oppressive darkness of my kitchen, paralyzed by a feeling of utter helplessness. Carol's voice echoed in my head, a triumphant phantom. "I told you so." All my defense of Leo, all my belief in his passion, it all felt like a foolish delusion now. In a real crisis, what good were his toys? We needed practical skills, not a fleet of custom-built drones. It's a terrible feeling, being proven wrong by the people who doubt you most, especially when the stakes are this high. If you've ever felt like you were the only one standing in your kid's corner, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If this story hits home, maybe give it a like or subscribe to the channel, because that feeling of isolation, of being the crazy one, it's a heavy weight to carry alone. And that night, I felt like it was about to crush me. The silence in the house was a physical weight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, dead quiet. I had to get to my mother. That was the only thought that cut through the fog of panic. The roads would be jammed, people would be scared, but I had to try. I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from the junk drawer, its beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness as I headed for the garage. Leo was already there, not panicked but focused. He had a headlamp on, casting a pool of intense white light on the workbench. He wasn't cursing anymore. He was working, his movements precise and economical as he connected a small, solar rechargeable battery pack to one of his consoles. "Leo, get away from that stuff," I said, my voice sharp with an urgency I didn't try to hide. "We need to go. Now, get your coat. I'm driving to Grandma's." He didn't even look up. "You can't," he said, his tone flat and matter-of-fact. He tapped a few keys, and one of the smaller monitors flickered to life, grainy and washed out. The primary grid is down. Hard. Looks like a cascading failure, but the propagation pattern is wrong. "I don't care about patterns, Leo. My mother is on an oxygen machine." I fumbled for the car keys on the hook by the door. "We're leaving." "No, you don't understand," he insisted, finally turning to look at me. His face, usually so animated when he talked about his work, was grim. "It's not just a blackout. Something caused it." Before I could argue, a sound from down the street ripped through the night, the grinding roar of a diesel engine turning over. It was our neighbor, Mr. Henderson, trying to start his enormous pickup truck. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then caught with a defiant bellow. A small, stupid part of me felt a surge of hope. Maybe it was just our block. Maybe the main roads were clear. Then the sky lit up. It wasn't lightning. It was a silent, searing blue-white flash that came from directly above. It was followed a split second later by a sound I will never forget, a high-frequency shriek like 1,000 nails being dragged across a blackboard, combined with the sickening crunch of metal being torn apart. The truck's engine died with a final choked gasp. I scrambled to the garage's side door, peering through its small window. Mr. Henderson's truck was a mangled wreck. The hood was peeled back like a tin can, and the engine block was a blackened, smoking crater. There was no fire, just an eerie, electrical glow that faded as I watched. Above, something dark and angular blotted out the stars for a moment before vanishing into the cloud cover. It moved with an unnatural, silent speed. My blood ran cold. The breath I was holding escaped in a ragged, pathetic whimper. The atmospheric anomalies. The news reports. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a solar flare. Something was up there, and it was hunting. The keys in my hand felt useless, stupid. My car, my plan, the entire world I understood 5 minutes ago, it was all gone. Driving to my mother's wasn't just a bad idea. It was suicide. The roads weren't an option. The phones were dead. There was no way to reach her, no way to help her. The helplessness I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a cage. I stumbled back from the window, my legs weak, and leaned against the cold drywall. Carol's voice was gone from my head, replaced by the shriek from the sky. All the arguments, all the judgments, they were so small, so insignificant. My eyes landed on Leo. He hadn't moved. He was staring at the monitor, his face illuminated by its pale light. On the screen was a simple radar sweep. A single, unidentified blip was moving in a slow, deliberate patrol pattern over our neighborhood. He was tracking it. He looked from the screen to the largest of his drones, a heavy-lift hexacopter he called, the Albatross, hanging from the ceiling. He wasn't looking at a toy. He was looking at an answer. And in that moment, staring at my strange, brilliant son, my terror didn't vanish, but it changed. It sharpened into a single, terrifying, and undeniable point of focus. My son's obsession wasn't a problem. It was the only thing that might save us. My gaze shifted from the radar screen to the hexacopter hanging in the gloom, the Albatross. It looked like some monstrous prehistoric insect, all sharp angles and carbon fiber. An answer. The thought was so alien, so terrifying, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. My entire life I had been taught to trust the system set in place. Call 911. Go to the authorities. Follow the procedures. Leo's world of custom electronics and flying machines was the antithesis of that. It was a world he built because the real one didn't have what he needed. Stay here. Lock the door behind me, I said, my voice low and tight. The old instincts were dying hard. Where are you going? Leo asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. It's still out there, moving toward the old mill. To the police station, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It sounded absurd even as I said it, but it was the only thing I could think of. It was the last vestige of the old world, the one where there were people you could call for help. They need to know what's happening. They'll have a plan. Leo just shook his head slowly, a gesture of pity that made my skin crawl. Their cars won't work either. I didn't answer. I had to try. I slipped out the side door into the chillingly silent night, my flashlight beam feeling pitifully small. The street was a ghost town. Cars sat inert in their driveways, dark and useless. Every few houses, a window held the flickering candlelight of a family huddled inside, just like us. Or just like I had been before I saw what was in the sky. I stayed in the shadows of the houses, my heart leaping into my throat at every gust of wind, every skittering piece of trash. I kept my eyes on the sky, expecting that silent, angular shape to reappear. The police station was only 6 blocks away, but the walk felt like a journey across a hostile alien planet. When I finally saw it, my last flicker of hope died. 2 of the patrol cars in the parking lot were mangled, just like Mr. Henderson's truck, their engine blocks fused into blackened slag. The building itself was dark, save for the frantic, erratic beams of flashlights moving inside. I pushed through the main doors into a scene of controlled chaos. A harried-looking officer, a woman with her hair escaping its tight bun, stood behind the main desk, a battery-powered lantern casting long, dancing shadows on her face. A handful of other people were there, all talking at once, their voices a panicked murmur. "My husband needs his insulin," one woman pleaded. "It's refrigerated." "We heard gunshots down on Elm," a man said, his voice trembling. The officer held up her hands. "Folks, please. We have no power. We have no communications. All our vehicles are down." Her eyes met mine, and I saw the same helplessness I felt reflected there, magnified by the weight of her uniform. I stepped forward anyway. "Something is in the sky," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's taking out vehicles, anything with a running engine." She gave me a long, weary look, the kind of look you give someone who is clearly in shock. "Ma'am, we've had a dozen reports of something in the sky, strange lights, loud noises. We think it was some kind of EMP, maybe from a solar flare." "No," I insisted, my frustration boiling over. "I saw it. It destroyed my neighbor's truck. It's patrolling. My son is tracking it on a radar he built." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew how I sounded, the crazy lady, the one whose son plays with toys in the garage. The officer's expression softened into one of professional dismissal. "Ma'am, I understand you're scared. We all are, but I have no way of verifying that. And even if I could, what would you have me do? We can't even get a car to the end of the block. Go home. Lock your doors. Stay inside." I stood there for a second, frozen. This was it. The system had failed. It wasn't just broken, it was blind, deaf, and paralyzed. All the rules, all the people I was supposed to trust in a crisis, were just as lost as I was. The frustration was a physical thing, a hot pressure behind my eyes. The fear that followed was colder, sharper. It was the fear of a safety net vanishing in midair, leaving nothing below but a long, dark fall. I turned and walked back out into the night. The walk home was different. I didn't feel like a citizen seeking help anymore. I felt like a trespasser. The world didn't belong to us anymore. The police couldn't help. The government couldn't help. Carol, with her well-meaning, useless advice, couldn't help. When I slipped back into the garage, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind me, The familiar smell of solder and ozone felt like the only sane thing in the world. Leo was still at his station, but he'd done more than just watch. He had the albatross on the floor now, its 6 arms spread wide. He was carefully attaching a small, insulated box to its undercarriage with a series of reinforced straps. My mother's emergency oxygen tanks were small, but they weren't light. He was modifying one of his drones to be a delivery vehicle. My last shred of doubt, my last ounce of allegiance to the old world and its rules, evaporated. The authorities weren't coming. There was no plan. There was only my son, in a garage full of his obsessions, building our own. I knelt on the cold concrete beside him, my earlier panic replaced by a fragile, crystalline focus. The world outside was dead, but in here, there was a pulse. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice steady. He looked up, surprised, as if noticing for the first time that I was truly with him, not just in the same room. "The payload harness needs to be balanced. It's designed for a camera gimbal, not a dead weight like an O2 tank. I need to recalibrate the flight controller to compensate for the asymmetry." He pointed to a spool of wire. "And I need to run a shielded power line to the release servo. I don't want any EM interference from up there, causing it to drop the package early." I became his hands. I passed him tools, held wires steady as he soldered, my fingers surprisingly nimble. The jargon was a foreign language, but the goal was simple, primal: get this tank to my mother. As he worked, I saw not a boy with a hobby, but a surgeon in his element. Every action was precise, born of thousands of hours of practice. My sister's words about wasted time echoed in my mind, but now they sounded like the ravings of a fool. This wasn't wasted time, it was training. We worked in near silence, the only sounds the soft click of his keyboard and the whisper of tools on plastic and metal. He had a small, hand-crank radio on the bench, its speaker emitting nothing but a low hiss. Suddenly, the hiss changed. It sharpened into a faint, high-pitched whine that rose in frequency, making the hairs on my arms stand up. Leo froze, his hand hovering over a circuit board. "Kill the light," he whispered, his eyes wide. I fumbled for the switch on the battery-powered lantern, plunging the garage into absolute darkness. Only the faint green glow of the radar screen remained. The single blip on the screen, the one that had been patrolling the edge of town, was now moving directly toward our position. Fast. The whine from the radio grew louder, a piercing digital shriek that felt like it was drilling into my skull. Then, an external sound. A low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones, coming from directly outside. A strange, pulsating blue light bled under the crack of the main garage door, painting a stark line across the floor. It was here. My breath hitched in my chest. I grabbed Leo's arm, my knuckles white. The hum grew in intensity, and with it came a series of soft, inquisitive clicks and whirs, like a camera lens focusing, but 1,000 times larger. It was examining us. It must have detected the faint electronic signature of Leo's equipment, a tiny spark of life in a dead town. My safe haven, my son's workshop, had become a beacon. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the same sickening crunch of tearing metal that had destroyed Mr. Henderson's truck. I expected the end. The humming vibrated through the concrete floor, up my legs, into my teeth. The blue light under the door flickered, strobed, and then it was gone. The soul-scraping whine from the radio died, returning to a simple hiss. The deep vibration faded, leaving a silence that was even more profound than before. I didn't dare breathe. Leo slowly leaned forward, his face inches from the radar screen. The blip, which had been sitting directly on top of our location, was now moving away, resuming its slow, methodical patrol pattern over the town. It had inspected us and moved on. For now, I let out a ragged gasp, my body trembling with the adrenaline crash. We couldn't stay here. We weren't safe. It knew something was here. It might come back. The garage was no longer a fortress. It was a target. Leo looked at me in the faint glow of the monitor, his expression grim but resolved. "It's hunting for power signatures," he said, his voice barely audible. "The Albatross runs on batteries. It's electrically quiet. If I fly it low and use the terrain for cover, I might be able to get through." My heart hammered. To send that machine out there was to send a piece of my son into the path of the hunter. Every instinct screamed at me to keep him, to keep everything, locked down and hidden. But I looked at the insulated box containing the small oxygen tank, and I saw my mother's face. I saw the police officer's empty eyes. I saw the dead, mangled cars. There was no one else. There was no other way. Carol had called my son's work an obsession. She was wrong. It was a lifeline. And we were about to throw it into the dark, praying it was long enough to reach. "Show me the flight path," I said. Leo swiveled in his chair, tapping the screen. A topographical map of our two towns and the state park between them filled the monitor. A dotted red line snaked across it, a path of impossible hope. It didn't follow the roads. It hugged the river, dipped into the dense woods of the state park, and made a final, straight shot across Miller's Pond to the cluster of houses where my mother lived. "The patrol pattern is predictable," he explained, his voice a low murmur. "It's flying a wide grid, about 500 feet up. It's ignoring the woods, probably because there are no power signatures to hunt in there. The Albatross can fly below the tree line. The riskiest part is here," he pointed to the open water of the pond. "But if I make the approach from the west, the old boathouse will block its line of sight until the last second." I stared at the red line. It was a strategy, a plan born from 1,000 hours of flight simulations and a deep, intuitive understanding of a world I never knew existed. I thought of the police officer's tired, dismissive face. Her plan was to lock the doors and wait. My son's plan was to fly. "The entity is moving east, toward the old quarry," Leo said, his eyes flicking back to the radar sweep. "It'll be on the far side of its patrol for the next 12 minutes. If we're going to do this, we have to go now." The decision was already made. The moment the garage door shuttered under the hunter's inspection, the choice was gone. There was only this path forward. "Okay," I said, my voice firm. "Let's go." Carrying the Albatross out of the garage felt like a covert operation. It was heavier than it looked. I took the front arms, Leo the back, and we shuffled through the side door into the profound, watchful silence of the night. The air was cold and carried the metallic, sterile scent of the hunter's passing. We placed the machine in the middle of the street, its carbon fiber legs clicking softly on the asphalt. It looked alien here, a piece of science fiction dropped into my quiet suburban life. Leo knelt, his controller in his hands, the small screen casting a glow on his concentrated face. He ran a final diagnostic, his thumbs flying across the controls. I stood beside him, scanning the starless, overcast sky, my ears straining for any sound beyond the whisper of the wind. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. This was it. The culmination of every argument with Carol, every dollar spent on parts, every weekend lost to the garage. All of it had led to my son kneeling on a dead street in the middle of the night, preparing to send one of his drones on a mission that defied everything we once called normal. All the systems had failed, all the authorities were helpless, and the only thing moving in the darkness was a machine my son had built with his own two hands. He looked up at me, his eyes asking the final question. I gave him a single, sharp nod. He took a deep breath and pushed the throttle forward. The 6 motors whirred to life in perfect unison, a sound that was shockingly loud in the dead quiet. It wasn't the angry roar of an engine. It was a clean, rising hum of pure electricity. A small vortex of dust and leaves swirled on the pavement beneath it. For a heart-stopping second, it just sat there, humming with potential energy. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for its size, the Albatross lifted from the ground. It ascended, not with a jump, but with a smooth, deliberate climb, like an elevator to the gallows. It hovered for a moment at eye level, its small camera lens pointed at us, a single, unblinking eye. Then Leo tilted the controls, and it banked sharply, dipping its nose and accelerating down the street, its humming motors fading into the oppressive quiet. I huddled next to him, my eyes locked on the controller's small screen, which now showed the world from the drone's perspective. This was the discovery, not of the thing in the sky, but of the world it had left behind. The Albatross skimmed over rooftops and between darkened houses, a ghost in a graveyard. I saw our neighborhood, our town, as I'd never seen it before, inert, powerless, dead. The high-definition camera transmitted every detail with chilling clarity. The abandoned cars, the single candles flickering in windows, the sheer, comprehensive totality of the failure. My breath hitched as we flew over the police station, the camera catching the mangled patrol cars in the lot, stark evidence of the hunter's passage. The officer's dismissive face flashed in my mind. She was in there, in the dark, waiting. We were out here, moving. "Following the river," Leo murmured, his knuckles white on the controls. The view on the screen tilted down, showing the black, glassy surface of the water, a ribbon of nothingness guiding our path. Staying below the tree line. The flight felt like an eternity. Every flicker of static on the screen, every gust of wind that made the image shudder, sent a spike of ice through my veins. I was watching a part of my son, a part of my hope, fly through enemy territory, and I was utterly helpless. When the woods of the state park gave way to the open expanse of Miller's Pond, my heart seized. This was the most dangerous part. "Approaching from the west," Leo said, his voice a strained whisper. "Boathouse is providing cover." The screen showed the dark, peaked roof of the boathouse sliding by beneath us. And then, there it was, my mother's street, my mother's house. I held my breath, bracing myself for the sight of a dark, cold home, praying she was still okay, that we weren't too late. But the house wasn't dark. Lights were on, not the flickering, uncertain glow of candles, but the steady, brilliant yellow of electric light pouring from the living room window. A low hum, barely audible, even through the drone's sensitive microphone, reached us. A generator. And parked in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light, was a car I knew as well as my own. It was Carol's SUV, untouched. Perfect. The twist wasn't a twist. It was a sledgehammer. The screen in front of me showed a scene of impossible normalcy, an island of the old world in a sea of darkness, and it shattered me. Carol was here. Her car worked. They had power. The oxygen tank strapped to the belly of the Albatross, the payload we had risked everything to send, was utterly, cruelly useless. It wasn't a cascading grid failure. It wasn't random. The news reports, the atmospheric anomalies, it was all a lie, or at least a story told to people like me, people who weren't important enough to be told the truth. Carol hadn't just been calling to criticize me. She hadn't just been judging my parenting. She had known this was coming. She had a way to protect herself, a way to get our mother, a way to keep her car running when every other engine was being turned to slag. And she had left us to die. All her words, all her concern-laced lectures replayed in my head, but they sounded different now. They weren't criticisms, they were justifications. She wasn't trying to save Leo from his obsession. She was writing him and me off. We were the crazy ones, the ones who wouldn't listen, the ones who put our faith in silly, useless toys. We were the liability she had to cut loose. The coldness of it, the sheer, calculated pragmatism of her betrayal, was a chasm that opened up right under my feet. "What is it?" Leo asked, his voice pulling me from the spiral. He saw my face, saw the horror that had replaced the anxiety. "It's Carol," I choked out, my voice ragged. "She's there. They have power." Leo stared at the screen, his mind working faster than mine. He zoomed the camera in on the SUV, then back to the house. He understood. He looked at the drone's controls, his fingers hovering over a switch labeled AUX. "It has an external speaker," he said quietly, "for proximity alerts." My grief and shock hardened instantly into something cold and sharp. "Turn it on," I commanded. He flipped the switch. A soft crackle of static emitted from the controller, confirming the channel was open. I took the controller from his hands. My thumb trembled over the talk button. I saw a figure move behind the curtains in the window. Carol. She must have heard the drone's hum. the porch light clicked off, and the front door opened a crack. I pressed the button. "Carol," I said. My voice, tinny and distorted, erupted from the hovering machine 50 miles away. "What a surprise to see you here." The figure at the door recoiled, as if struck. The door swung open, and my sister stood there, her face a pale, horrified mask in the faint light from inside. She stared up at the dark shape hanging in the air above her driveway, a machine she had mocked for years, now a messenger from the world she had abandoned. "Sarah?" she gasped, her voice a faint whisper carried back to us by the drone's mic. "How?" "My son's toys?" I said, the words dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "They're more useful than you thought. Why do you have power, Carol? Why does your car still work?" She stood frozen on her porch, cornered by a ghost. There was no lie she could tell that would fit the facts. The evidence was hovering right in front of her. Her silence was a confession. "I have a contact," she finally stammered, her voice breaking. "Someone I work with. They knew. They had a contingency, a protected enclave. They gave me a device for my car, a pass. I came for Mom." "But not for us," I said. It wasn't a question. "I tried to warn you," she cried, her words a pathetic attempt at self-defense. "I told you to be practical. I told you Leo needed to live in the real world. I had to make a choice, Sarah. I had to save Mom. I couldn't bring you in. They wouldn't have. Not with you trusting all this. She gestured wildly at the albatross. This was the payoff. The skill, the obsession, the thing she had used to condemn us was now our salvation and her judgment. This machine, born of my son's magnificent misunderstood mind, had not only been our one chance to save our mother, but it had also been the key to uncovering a betrayal so deep it stole my breath. We didn't need her contingency. We didn't need her pass. We had our own. I looked at Leo. His face was grim, but his eyes shone with a fierce, terrible pride. He had done it. He had flown through the dark and brought back the truth. I looked back at the screen, at my sister, small and pathetic on her island of safety. I could have dropped the oxygen tank. I could have let it smash on her perfect protected driveway as a final bitter message. But we were better than that. "Bring it home, Leo," I said, my voice clear and steady. He nodded, and on the screen I watched the albatross tilt its body, turn its back on my sister's house, and begin the long, quiet flight back to us. We didn't need her. We didn't need anything from her world. We would survive in the one she left us in. We had our drones. The flight back was a journey through a vacuum. The drone's humming motors, transmitted through the controller's tiny speaker, were the only sound in the universe. Beside me, Leo was a statue of concentration, his face illuminated by the screen, guiding our hope home through the darkness. I wasn't watching the screen anymore. I was watching the scene on my sister's porch play out again and again behind my eyes, her pale, shocked face, her pathetic excuses, her confession. "I had to make a choice, Sarah. The choice to leave your sister and your nephew in a dead zone, to be hunted by monsters, while you retreated to a protected enclave. The betrayal was so absolute, so monumental, it felt like a law of physics had been broken. It left me hollowed out, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away to leave a cold, heavy dread. The hunter in the sky was a simple threat. It wanted to destroy. My sister's betrayal was a complex poison, one that retroactively tainted every memory I had of her. When the rising hum of the albatross became audible in the real world, I finally looked up. It descended from the black sky, a returning angel, and settled onto the asphalt with a soft click of its landing gear. We carried it back into the garage, the insulated box with the oxygen tank still strapped to its belly. It felt impossibly heavy now, weighed down not by metal and compressed gas, but by the lie it represented. I sagged against the workbench, the strength leaving my legs. The silence of the garage pressed in, thick and suffocating. This was my world now, a workshop smelling of solder and a son who saw things I couldn't, and a sister who had chosen to forget we existed. "It recorded everything," Leo said quietly, breaking the spell. He was already detaching the drone's solid-state drive. The entire flight path, high-definition video, and the audio from the confrontation. It's all here. A new feeling pushed through the hollow space in my chest. It wasn't hope. It was colder, sharper. It was purpose. The police officer's tired, dismissive face floated in my mind. Go home. Lock your doors. She was blind. We had just brought back a pair of eyes. Put it on a tablet, I said, my voice hard. The one with the longest battery life. I'm going back. The walk to the police station was no longer one of fear. I was no longer a frightened citizen scurrying through the shadows. I was a courier, carrying a message that would burn the old world down. The station was the same island of frantic helplessness, but I strode through the doors like I owned it. The officer was still at the desk, now arguing with a man who was demanding a battery for his daughter's nebulizer. She saw me and her face tightened with exasperation. "Ma'am, I don't have time for this. I told you." I didn't let her finish. I placed the tablet on the counter in front of her. "You told me to go home," I said, my voice low and clear, cutting through the panicked chatter in the room. "You thought I was seeing things. You thought it was a solar flare. You were wrong." I hit play. I showed her the world from 500 feet up. I showed her the footage of her own mangled patrol cars, seen from an angle no person could have managed. I watched her professional composure crack as the drone's camera panned over the inert, darkened town, block by silent block. Then I fast-forwarded to Miller's Pond and to my mother's street, to Carol's house. The officer stared at the impossible image, a single home, blazing with light in a sea of black, a perfect, undamaged SUV in the driveway. She leaned closer to the screen, her breath fogging the cold glass. Then I let her hear it, my disembodied voice from the drone, and Carol's panicked, damning reply. "I have a contact. They knew a protected enclave. They gave me a device for my car, a pass." The officer recoiled from the tablet as if it were white hot. The weariness in her eyes was gone, replaced by sharp, cold alarm. She looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time. She didn't see a crazy lady anymore. She saw the truth. "Miller," she yelled, her voice cracking like a whip through the station. "Get in here, now!" Another officer came running. She pointed a trembling finger at the tablet. "Play that again," she commanded me. Then, to her colleague, "Get on the emergency band. I don't care if you have to power it with a damn potato. Get a message to the county EOC. Tell them the blackout is not a grid failure. It's targeted. Tell them we have confirmation of a hostile entity and evidence of a protected zone." She turned back to me, her eyes boring into mine. "Where did you get this footage?" I thought of all the years of doubt, of the criticism, of the lonely nights Leo spent in the garage. I thought of my sister's judgment and my own wavering faith. The system hadn't just failed, it had actively mocked the one thing that could save it. Until now. "My son," I said, and the pride in my voice was the only warmth I had felt all night. "He built it." The authorities, the people with the plans and the procedures, were now huddled around a tablet, watching a video recorded by one of my son's drones. The machine they would have dismissed as a toy had just become the most important intelligence asset in their world. They weren't in charge anymore. The future was not in their hands. It was in my son's. I walked out of the police station and into a world that felt fundamentally altered. The short-lived fire of vindication had burned out, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. I had proven them wrong. I had forced the blind to see. But the image on the tablet, Carol's face, crumbling as she confessed, offered no triumph, only a profound and bottomless grief. It was one thing to be hunted by a monster from the sky. It was another to be cut loose by your own sister. The walk home was a blur. When I slipped back into the garage, Leo was where I'd left him, but the space felt different. It was no longer a workshop or a refuge. It was a command center. The radar sweep on the monitor was no longer a curiosity. It was a sentry, a constant looping reminder of the threat that circled us. The Albatross sat on the floor, its mission complete, but it didn't look like a success. It looked like an omen. The insulated box containing the oxygen tank was a monument to a pointless, painful journey. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay on the sofa in the living room, a blanket pulled up to my chin, and stared into the oppressive darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on the street, huddled next to Leo, watching the world through the drone's camera. The images were burned into my mind, the mangled cars, the flickering candles, my sister's house blazing with treacherous light. The high-frequency shriek of the hunter echoed in my ears, punctuated by the tinny, distorted sound of my own voice accusing my sister. I'd drift into a light, feverish doze, only to be jolted awake by the memory of the pulsating blue light under the garage door, convinced it was back, convinced it was right outside. Sometime before dawn, I gave up. I found my way to the garage, drawn by an instinct I didn't understand. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and dread. Leo was asleep in his chair, his head slumped against the workbench, his breathing soft and even. He looked so young, so painfully vulnerable. My heart ached with a terrible mix of pride and guilt. His obsession had saved us, but it had also cost him the last of his childhood. He wasn't a boy building drones anymore. He was a soldier in a war he never enlisted for. My eyes fell on the albatross. I felt a wave of nausea. This machine, this beautiful, complex creation, was now tainted. It was inextricably linked to my sister's betrayal. It was the instrument that had delivered the truth, but the truth was a poison. I reached out a trembling hand and touched its carbon fiber chassis. It was cold, inert. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't a tool. It felt like a weapon, and its use had left a wound on our family that would never heal. All the joy I used to feel watching Leo work, the simple pride in his genius, was gone. It had been replaced by a grim, anxious dependency. We needed his drones to survive, and I hated them for it. A soft crackle of static made me jump. It came from the emergency band radio Leo had wired into his console. A voice, rough and strained, cut through the hiss. To the civilian operator at grid coordinate 49er, this is County EOC. We need a SIT representative. Do you have eyes on the hostel? Over. I froze. County Emergency Operations Center. They were talking to us. To Leo, civilian operator. They had given my son a military designation. Leo stirred, woken by the voice. He blinked, pushing himself upright, and the exhaustion on his face was immediately replaced by a sharp, weary focus. He reached for the microphone. "Don't," I whispered, a sudden, fierce protectiveness surging through me. "Leo, don't answer." He looked at me, his eyes old. "They know we're here," he said, his voice raspy with sleep. "They know what we can do. If I don't answer, they'll just keep calling." The signal is another thing for the hunter to find. He was right. Of course he was right. We had shown them our hand, we had traded our anonymity for their belief, and now they expected us to keep playing. The vindication I had felt in that police station had turned into a leash. They weren't coming to save us. They were coming to use us. Leo keyed the mic. "EOC, this is operator. I read you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Negative on visual contact. The hostile is maintaining its patrol pattern on the eastern perimeter. Over." He released the button, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken obligations. I looked from my son's tired face to the fleet of silent drones hanging from the ceiling. They weren't a passion project anymore. They were our burden, our curse. They were the only reason we were still alive, and the reason we would never be safe again. Another voice crackled over the radio, this one sharper, more authoritative. "Operator, this is EOC Command. We need you to deploy your asset for reconnaissance. We're trying to map the hostiles, patrol routes, and identify any safe zones. Can you comply?" Asset, they were calling my son's creation an asset. Leo reached for the mic again, but I put my hand over his. He looked at me, his eyes questioning, but he didn't fight it. I leaned toward the microphone, the cold metal pressing against my lips. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice flat. There was a pause. The voice came back, strained with impatience. "This is Deputy Director Marks, County EOC. Who am I speaking with?" "You're speaking with the mother of the boy you're trying to turn into a soldier," I said, the words like chips of ice. "Let me be clear. You will not give my son orders. You will not call his work your asset. He is not your operator. He is a child in a garage that, 12 hours ago, your people dismissed as a joke. Things have changed. So now, we're going to set some new rules." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could picture it perfectly, a room full of people in uniforms, people who had been in charge of everything, staring at a radio speaker, being dictated to by a ghost. "We have nothing," the voice marks finally said, the authority gone, replaced by a raw, pleading desperation. "All our aerial resources are grounded. We're blind. We need those eyes. We need your son's drones." "I know what you need," I snapped. "What you don't seem to understand is that you are not in a position to make demands. You want intel? You want to see the world you lost? Fine, but you'll do it on my terms." Leo watched me, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. This wasn't the mother he knew. This was someone forged in the last few hours, someone made of fury and grief. "What are your terms?" Marks asked, the question a complete surrender. "First," I said, "you're going to send Officer Evans here, the one from the station, unarmed. She's going to be our liaison. I'll only talk to her. Second, you need parts. My son needs parts. Lithium polymer batteries, carbon fiber sheets, high-torque servos, solid-state drives. You have access to supply depots, electronic stores. Your people will make runs for us. They will deliver the supplies to a drop point I designate. Third, my son does not fly missions on your command. He flies when it's safe, and he chooses the routes. We give you the data, and in return you keep us supplied and you keep everyone else away. This garage is not your new field office. It's my home. Are we clear?" Another long, heavy silence. I was demanding that the entire command structure of the county defer to a suburban mother and her teenage son. I was asking the system that had failed us to now become our supply chain. "We're clear," Mark said, his voice hollow. "Evans is on her way." I clicked off the mic and sank back, my body trembling. The power dynamic had been irrevocably broken and remade. When Officer Evans arrived an hour later, on foot, her face pale and drawn, she didn't look at me with dismissal. She looked at me with the desperate respect of someone whose life now depended on me. She looked at the drones hanging from the ceiling not as toys, but as the only instruments of power left in the world. She handed me a list. It was an inventory of a nearby National Guard depot. "Director Marks said to give you this," she said, her voice quiet. "Tell us what you need. We'll get it." I passed the list to Leo. He scanned it, and for the first time since the lights went out, a flicker of the old excitement sparked in his eyes. He pointed to a line item. "They have military-grade thermal cameras and encrypted radio transceivers. If I can integrate these into the smaller drones, the Sparrow and the Kestrel, I can set up a persistent surveillance network. They'd be harder for the hunter to spot." I looked at Evans. Her face was a mask of grim acceptance. The system hadn't just been forced to change, it was being rebuilt, piece by piece, right here in my garage. My son, the boy they told me was wasting his life, was now drawing up the blueprints. I had won the argument against Carol, against my family, against the world. But standing there, listening to my son talk about thermal cameras and surveillance networks, I knew the price of being right was higher than I could ever have imagined. A month has passed. The world outside our garage remains a silent, paralyzed landscape. But inside, a new kind of system has taken root. Our life is now measured in battery cycles and supply drops. Evans comes every 2 days, a ghost in a uniform, bringing lists and taking data drives. The street corner at the end of our block has become the designated drop point, where once a week, a silent, terrified-looking guardsman leaves a Pelican case full of servos, wiring, and vacuum-sealed food rations before scrambling away. The hunter, or hunters as we now know, still patrol their grid, their patterns logged and analyzed by my son. The garage is no longer Leo's workshop. It's the EOC's unofficial eye in the sky. It smells less like a hobbyist's den and more like a sterile operations center. The joy is gone. I watch Leo, my brilliant son, hunched over the console, his face lit by the glow of topographical maps and thermal imaging. He's thinner, the youthful roundness of his cheeks sharpened into angles of constant stress. He doesn't talk about flight dynamics or lift-to-drag ratios anymore. He talks about ingress routes and thermal signatures. I had fought so hard to protect his passion only to watch it be weaponized, conscripted. I'd won the argument, but my son was paying the price. My grief over Carol's betrayal has settled into a hard, dense stone in my gut, a permanent part of my anatomy. I don't feel anger anymore, just a vast, aching emptiness where a sister used to be. Last Tuesday, I couldn't stand it anymore. While Leo was running a passive scan of the eastern perimeter, I started cleaning. I gathered the empty ration packs, the discarded coffee cups Evans would leave, the dust bunnies gathering in the corners. I started organizing the shelves, not for mission efficiency, but with the care I used to. "Mom, what are you doing?" Leo asked, his eyes still on the screen. I had those components sorted by priority. "This is not a forward operating base, Leo," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I stopped and turned to face him. "This is still our home. It's your space, and you need a part of it back." I cleared off his original workbench, the one where he built his first quadcopter. I wiped it down until the scarred plywood gleamed under the lantern light. I left his soldering iron, his favorite set of precision screwdrivers, and a few miscellaneous motors. I was drawing a line in the sand, a boundary against the grim reality that had invaded our lives. This half of the garage was for the war, this half was for my son. He watched me, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he swiveled his chair away from the main console and looked at the clean workbench. He looked at the graveyard of prototypes still hanging from the ceiling. "They want me to build a new one," he said quietly. "Something smaller, faster, purely for reconnaissance. They're calling it the Scout program." I felt the familiar cold dread. More missions, more risks. But then I looked at the main screen, at the map of our dead world. My eyes found the green swath of the state park, the place where my mother's house sat on its edge, an island of treacherous safety. "Before you do that," I said, "I want you to do something for me." He waited. "The Albatross," I said. "Is it still flight ready?" "Yes. I keep it maintained." "I want you to fly it, not for them, for us." I pointed to the map. "Fly it over the park, low and slow. Stay away from the enclave. I want to see the trees." Leo looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. It was the first request I'd made that didn't involve survival. It was a command with no strategic value. After a moment, he nodded. 20 minutes later, we were huddled together, watching the controller's screen. The Albatross lifted off, its familiar hum no longer sounding like a prelude to terror, but something more akin to a sigh. Leo piloted it with a gentle, practiced ease I hadn't seen in weeks. He followed the river, the camera showing us the still, black water. But then he lifted, clearing the treetops, and my breath caught in my throat. The world was on fire with color. Autumn had come. A rolling canopy of crimson, gold, and orange stretched out beneath us, a sight of impossible, defiant beauty. The drone's camera was so steady, so clear, it felt like we were soaring ourselves. Leo dipped lower, and we skimmed over a clearing where a family of deer, startled by the hum, looked up before bounding back into the vibrant woods. There were no hunters here. No mangled cars. No betrayals. There was only the quiet, unchanging turning of the season. I felt Leo relax beside me, the tension easing out of his shoulders for the first time in a month. He wasn't a soldier right now. He was a pilot, a creator, sharing his vision of the world with his mother. The drone in the sky wasn't an asset or a weapon. It was a paintbrush, and it was showing me that something of the old world something beautiful and worth fighting for, still remained. I put my arm around my son's shoulders, and we watched the forest drift by on the screen, two survivors finding a moment of peace in a machine born of obsession, now repurposed, if only for an afternoon, for grace. That flight became a ritual. After every tent supply run, after every long night spent tracking the hunters for the EOC, we would take an hour. We would send one of the drones, not the new, militarized scouts that Leo is building, but one of his originals, back to the woods. We watched the seasons change through its high-definition eyes. We saw frost glitter on the golden leaves, and then the first snow blanketing the forest floor in a clean, silent white. We watched a fox chase a rabbit across a frozen pond. These flights were our secret act of rebellion. They were a declaration that while our skills were being used for survival, our souls were not for sale. The change in Leo was subtle but profound. The hard, weary lines around his eyes began to soften. One evening, I found him at his old workbench, sketching in a notebook. It wasn't a tactical drone with mounting points for thermal cameras. It was sleek, elegant, with wings like a dragonfly. "It's for filming," he said, without me having to ask. "The motors are almost silent. It could get within a few feet of a bird's nest without disturbing it." He was creating for joy again. He was reclaiming his passion from the grim machine of necessity. I never heard from Carol again. The enclave, according to Evans, was real. A handful of the connected and the privileged, walled off from the world they let burn. I sometimes wonder what she thinks about when she looks out at the dead, silent towns beyond her protected zone. Does she ever think of us? The anger I felt has long since cooled into a kind of sad, distant pity. She chose a cage with golden bars, believing it was safety. She traded her family for a pass. We were left in the wilderness, and we learned to fly. My son's obsession didn't just save our lives, it built a new one. I look around the garage now, at the hum of the servers, the quiet blinking of the charging stations, the radar sweep that has become the steady rhythm of our new life. This is our system. It's a world built not on authority and procedure, but on ingenuity, trust, and a parent's belief in their child. I am no longer haunted by doubt. I know the answer to the question that plagued me that first night. I wasn't just a lucky parent. I was a good one, because I was the one who stayed in the garage with him, who learned his language, who chose to believe in his strange, magnificent world, even when I didn't understand it. We are safe now, not because the hunters are gone. They are still out there, silent shadows in the sky, but because we are no longer afraid of the dark. We have our own eyes in the sky. We have our own way. We have each other. And we have a fleet of custom-built drones that remind us every day that sometimes the things the world dismisses as a problem are, in fact, the only solution that matters. This journey started in a place of doubt, and it's been a long, hard flight to get here. If our story helped you see your own world a little differently, or gave you a reason to stand in your kid's corner, maybe give it a like. And if you want to see where we fly next, be sure to subscribe.